Hello, everyone. Welcome to the My Name Is podcast. I'm your host, Ms. Rivera. We just got done talking for about an hour and 20 minutes about the Second Amendment. It's a very, very interesting conversation. If you're interested in knowing kind of the roots of it, what the founders and framers actually meant when they were talking about the Second Amendment, I really want you to stick around. We try to have a conversation with those that maybe disagree with the Second Amendment or are, on the side of gun control laws and these kinds of things that are happening in our country and seem to are getting worse from my perspective and my point of view. So if you're interested in this kind of conversation, just stick around with us for the next hour and 20 minutes. We would really appreciate it. And if you like what you hear, make sure that you subscribe, like, follow, do all that good stuff. It really does help us out. Enjoy this episode. Thanks. All right, everyone. Welcome to the My Name Is podcast. I'm your host, Ms. Rivera. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is what we're going to talk about today. We are now moving on to the Second Amendment, and it is number 2 in the Bill of Rights, and we are excited. I told my wife I might stay on this one a few weeks. I don't know. Probably not. I really shouldn't do that. I should try to get through these sessions as fast as I possibly can anyways. There's that thing where, people get tired of listening to the same, subject. And hopefully that's not happening, because part of the problem that we have in America right now and why America is so upset and so mad is because a lot of people don't understand these rights that we have. They don't understand why people fought for them, why people died for them. And so we want to take the time to be able to educate ourselves because we're learning a lot as we're going through this. So we're going to talk about the Second Amendment today. What does it mean? Why is there so much controversy? Why every time we mention the Second Amendment, people just kind of get into their separate groups? But before we do that, I just want to remind you to subscribe, follow, share, and like. It really does help us out. What we want to do is jump right into the discussion today. And there's so much that we can say about this. And I guess at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is give us an idea of the original intent of what the Second Amendment was. Most of you know it. I'll read it again to you here. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And let's discuss this from a different perspective at first. And for those expositors out there that maybe listen to what we have here at the My Name Is podcast, I don't want you to get too crazy with me, because I'm about to do something that I normally don't do. And I'm going to use the Bible in a certain way to apply somewhat of a practical application, I guess we can say. But it's not an exposition properly, okay? But it's an idea that I think it's important for us to talk about, because, if you go on the internet, if you listen to the chatter that's kind of happening out there in the world right now, there's a lot of Christian men and women that are getting pretty fed up with what they're seeing happen to their country. And I get that. I am on your side. I understand where you're coming from. Whenever we see immorality, sin being legalized and espoused and just being blatantly offered the way that it is in this country right now, we should definitely be upset about that, and we should definitely be praying about that. We definitely should be speaking up about these things. All of that is important. But and I don't know if this is a fringe part or if this is becoming more and more of a normal way of thinking. I really don't know. But it has to do with those kind of folks who are Christian who think that, maybe there needs to be some kind of Christian revolution in order to make America Christian again. You got the whole Trump thing with make America great again. Well, some people want to make, what would that be, maca? That doesn't, I don't know if that'll look good on a hat or not. And, but a lot of people want to make America Christian again. And I understand the sentiment. Obviously, I know the history of our country. And, one of the things that de Tocqueville, for example, points out in his book, Democracy in America, is the kinds of people that built this country were not the kinds of people that came here simply for greed, for money. They were the people that came here for freedom, for religious freedom, for people that came here that wanted to start a new kind of life. And at first it was difficult for the Pilgrims, the Puritans that first came to this country, to figure out how they were going to set that kind of society up. And I think they did a fantastic job. And clearly we've gotten very far away from those humble beginnings. And here we are. In some ways, often we get nostalgic and we would like to go back to living a more pure kind of Christian life as a society. But the reality is that we're not called to defend Christendom in that way. And that's kind of the first thing that I want to just begin with here. We do not take arms in defense of Christ. And this is very important, because I do feel that there's at least a growing buzz, if anything, of certain people that feel that, not that they're going to go out and, be violent or anything like that, but it's almost like an inner preparation. I've heard this in conferences that I've gone to. I've heard the question come up. I've never heard it spoken of in a conference. I probably wouldn't be in a conference like that, but I've heard the question come up. When do we know, for example, it's one of the questions I heard, that we have to fight? And of course, we all know what that means. And so we have to be really careful as Christians when it comes to these things. And one of the places that I wanted to take you in Scripture was just to remind you, we're not going to do an exposition here, but was to remind you of the story of when Judas came, right, with the band of men who were armed with swords and clubs. And they were coming with Judas because he was about to betray Jesus with a kiss. And there was Peter there, as impulsive as Peter was, and drew his weapon, and in an effort to defend his rabbi, he swung it violently. And as we know, he cut off the ear of one of the slave of the high priest. And Jesus tells Peter these words. He says, "Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take up the sword will perish by the sword." And I find this very interesting, because with this statement, Jesus makes it clear in his word that the Christian man or woman is not to take up arms in the name of Christ. That we don't need to try and defend Christ or Christendom in this way. That is, that Christ could have defended himself pretty well. So Peter's actions really, and here's something that Jesus said, in case you didn't know that Jesus could defend himself. He says, "Do you think," and this is him speaking to Peter still, "do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legion of angels?" So clearly, Jesus could have defended himself, but he was here on a mission. And he was not going to give that mission up at that moment. And he never gave up that mission. Well, in the case of Peter's action there, what we see is not self-defense, okay? What we see is an is an offensive gesture. And what I mean by offensive, think about sports here, right? You got defense and you got offense. So it was in offensive position. He was on the offense, okay? Now, one thing is missed, I think, in this story, and this is where the practical application comes from. Here we have the Prince of Peace, right? Jesus Christ himself, the one who can defend himself, and doesn't need any kind of sword or weapon or club or anything like that. He can just ask God, his Father, and the Father would just send 12 legion of angels, as he said. And yet he doesn't tell Peter, hey, go bury the sword and go throw it into the river. Hey, you shouldn't be carrying that. He simply tells him, put it back in the sheath. Put it away. And that indicates to us something that is interesting, that Peter carried in the modern day terms, right? I don't know, maybe he was concealed carry. I don't know if he was concealing or not, but we know he had it, and we can probably assume to some degree that was the norm, at least for him, if not for some of the other apostles that were there and disciples that were there, I should say. And so it's interesting how in this one instance where maybe Jesus could have said, hey, you never do that, and he does say quite clearly to him, those who take up the sword will perish by the sword. And he's saying, if you're going to defend here Christendom by the sword, then you're going to die by the sword, which is an interesting statement because it talks about taking things by force. And one of the things that we're going to learn about the Second Amendment is that it's not meant for that. It's not meant to be on the offensive with your weapon. If you have a gun or any other kind of weapon, it is not intended for you to use that weapon to get what you want. That's what bad people do. That's what criminals do. They go into a convenience store, or they stick up an old lady on the sidewalk with a gun. That's what they do. That's not what we do. And, we don't take up an arm when a police officer pulls us over just because we don't like it. We don't want to get a speeding ticket, or they might arrest us. We have to try and go the peaceful way as much as we can. And I want to emphasize that here in the beginning, because I am pro the Second Amendment. I will, fight to keep that amendment. I think I am a gun owner myself. And so to me, it seems simple in my mind. Okay. But I know that there's another side of this that does not seem so simple to other people. And I want to try to address that in the best way that I can, as I've been thinking about this. Okay. And trying to write my thoughts down. And so I'm going to try to do my best to talk to you about that in such a way that I don't want to belittle the other side, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I often find that while we do often need to be offensive because we're going to say things to people that are going to upset them, that are going to offend them, that are going to anger them even. Okay. We need to make sure that what we're doing is not trying to belittle people. It's easy to do that. It's one of the most unfortunate things that I'm seeing right now all over, in major, conservative shows and this kind of thing. People just find it hilarious to put videos up of whether it's Biden or Kamala or whatever in the most egregious way. And then you see the same thing from the other side as well. And it's just mudslinging to me. And what I want to do, even though some of those things are funny, obviously, and in a comedy setting, that it's not a problem. I think, comedians have that freedom to kind of poke fun and make fun, and we should have the freedom to do that in this country. But when we can't try and let's say convince the other side of our position by belittling people. Okay, so I might still say some things that might offend you if you happen to be on the other side and you're listening to us here. But I want you to understand, I'm simply trying to state the facts as I see them, as I know them, and I always say to you all, if you want to engage in the conversation, my information is out there. mindofmiz.com. You can always reach us there, and we're more than happy to take that into consideration. So it would be silly for me, right, to try and take this passage of scripture that we're talking about here and just make it and say, well, this is the Bible saying this is the right to bear arms. I'm not saying that, okay? And this is why I started by saying, the expositors out there, don't gang up on me just yet. I understand the difference between expositing the word of God and just using, something that we see to try to make, an application where we can. And I'm simply trying to point out that at least from a biblical perspective, we do have reason to believe that humans have a natural right, okay, or at least we could say a real right that derives from natural rights. And if you don't know what I mean by natural rights, I've explained this in other videos. Essentially, it means basic rights that every single human has, okay? And so you might think to yourself, let me explain this, because I feel like if I just get past this might not be good. Okay, you might think to yourself, well, Miz, it's not like you come out the womb with a gun, right? So how is that a natural right? Well, if it's not a natural right, and let's give you that, let's say it's not, it's a derivative, if we want to think about it this way, of a natural right, meaning that you're born, you have the right to life, okay? And so if you have the right to life, then you have the right to self-defense, okay? This is all part of your natural rights. And if that is the case, and having a weapon is the most effective way for you to protect that life, then that's a derivative of that natural right, or itself, right? Having the right to bear arms becomes a natural right. That's why we say that, okay? So because a lot of people, we think about this so different in our modern day age, okay? Because there are weapons out there that are scary, let's say, to some people. And people are often, me and my wife were talking about this earlier, people often have the idea of a gun being a bad thing, okay? Like if it has little legs and it just walks around pointing at people and shooting people, right? And so guns are the thing that always get attacked. And I think what's happening there is that you have the people that understand the amendment, the Second Amendment here, but want to manipulate you. And so they're gonna craft a story to put fear into you about guns, and let's say in this case, but they know what they're doing. So this is why I say it's hard we don't want to belittle the other side, because often the other side is the kind of person that is being honest, is a we define good as Christians in a particular way, but is a good person, if you want to think about this way, and even a moral person. And simply is the kind of person that is a docile person, which leads me to my next point here. I'm not trying to make things simplistic here, but for the case or for trying to be just more simple, okay, I want to make a broad statement here. You have people in the world, you can separate them into two groups. We've done this before, right? In Christian circles, we talked about the elect and the reprobate, okay, that kind of thing. Some people think of good and evil. But think about it like this, okay, just for our conversation here today, at least. Think about those that are violent and those that are docile, Okay. And think about people in your life. Think about people in your life that would never hurt a fly. Okay. That they just, they're the kind of people that if they see an insect in the house, they want to, corral it and put it in a cup and gently put it on the grass outside. Okay. And then you got other people who are quick to want to fight. They're violent. They're super expressive and if you cut them off on the road, they're following you for 2 blocks and scaring you to death. You've got these two kinds of people. You got people that automatically, are gonna fight, and then you have those that are gonna not fight. Okay, and I know that sounds simple, but the reason that I want to bring that up in this way is because when it comes to guns, talking about guns and the Second Amendment, these two sides tend to be the loudest. And really, these two sides tend to have these extremes on either end that are pretty loud. And I think often that's what we start hearing. And I think it drowns out a reasonable understanding of what we would call the Second Amendment, okay, today, which is, in my opinion, pretty straightforward as to what it actually says. Okay. So what was the intent of this original, what was the original intent, I just say, of the Second Amendment? Because that's important. We always want to look at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in light of what the founding fathers and the framers, we'll call them founders and framers, of what they thought, what they believed, what they wrote. The cool thing is that we have a lot of that information. For example, this book that we're giving away, today's the last day, mindofmiz.com/giveaway, has a lot of these documents that explain these things. They tell you what they thought. You don't have to go to someone who interprets the Bill of Rights for you. You can simply go to the founding fathers and see what they were saying about it. So the question then becomes, what was the original intent, okay, of this amendment, and what right was it actually describing? Now, I want to point out here, because I might not get into the details of this today, but there's essentially 2 clauses that I can see here in this Second Amendment. The first one is a well-regulated militia. Do you see that? And then you also have the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And so this, I think, has been part of the confusion. People have tended to, either mix or separate these in such a way that it gets a little convoluted. And I'm going to try to repair some of that here, at least the way that I think about it and the way that I've learned this as well. But the way that I process the Second Amendment in my own mind. Now, we talked earlier, just a few minutes ago, about the violent and the docile. And one of the things that history has taught us is that the violent tend to win. Okay. So think about a war, right? Whoever wins the war typically gets the spoil, right? To the victor goes the spoils. So even when the violent, in this case, are fighting for the best kind of cause, which in the War of Independence, okay, also known the Revolutionary War, right? War of Independence here in America. The founders and all of those that fought in these wars, right? Yeah, George Washington was the general. And these men were being violent. They were fighting. They were being tactical. For Washington, at least, it was a war of attrition. It was just stay alive and keep fighting and keep fighting and keep fighting. You just got to stay alive, because they were going up against the greatest military in the world at the time, in Great Britain. And so you have this violence happening. And one side is dead set on making sure they're taking the rights away of these these colonists, of these people that live in these 13 colonies. And the colonists, the people in the 13 colonies, are fighting to their death in order to protect what they believe is their natural right. And so even when the cause is good, violence seems to be the ultimate way to achieve your goal. And this is difficult for a lot of people to understand because, if you're a peace-loving person, if you're a docile person, if you're someone who does not like confrontation, to you think, well, can't we just talk these things out? Can't we just sit around the table and just be diplomatic? Well, if you understand history here, you'll know that was the initial attempt, was to talk, was to send letters of grievances, was to say, hey, this isn't right. What's going on here? And we see this in the Declaration of Independence. If you read through that document, you'll see that you can only be under tyranny for so long. Okay. So it's not even that the Second Amendment is telling us, for example, at the first hint of, tyranny, you start shooting. No, that's not the point of it at all. This is why when I hear talk about people saying, is it time? When do we know is the time? It's almost like we're preparing ourselves, but we got to think about these things because that's a big price to pay on both sides. Okay. If we get to a point in this country where we're taking up arms in order to defend the Constitution within our own borders, that would be a very, very sad day in America. Some people say we're close to that. I don't know. I'm not God. I have no idea how close or how far we are to that. Upon looking at history, we have some ideas that we might be closer than we would want to be to something like that. But we can still dialogue. We can still talk. And this is part of my motivation for doing this series is, well, do people know this? Have people understood this? Has someone tried to communicate this to folks? I'm not saying I'm the best guy for it, but within my small circle of influence, I want to at least have this conversation and make sure that people are learning these things so that we can think about these things better. Well, we know enough about the founding fathers that and the framers, okay, the founders and the framers, to know that the thought of natural rights was central to their way of thinking. Okay. Now, they could not have envisioned, for example, assault rifles like we have today, military grade weapons, okay, that we possess. They wouldn't have been able to probably foresee all of these things. But here's the thing, whether it's calibers, velocity, the automation of weapons, none of that seemed to figure into their way of thinking when it came to what they believe about the people and the right to bear arms. Okay. So, for example, I have not come across, and if I'm wrong, someone can correct me on this, but I haven't come across a document from that era, from the founders and framers, that is specific as to the kind of weaponry. There might be something like that out there. I haven't seen it yet. But that restricts, in other words, the conversation that we're having today, right, in America often revolves around the kind of weapon. And so you hear this whole, that's an assault weapon. Well, I mean, so is a knife, right? You can assault someone with a knife. You can assault someone with a bat. You can assault someone with, just about anything, really, if you think about it. And so, but we have these ideas of the kinds of weapon that we should use. And what's happening is that there's a growing movement to disarm the people. Okay. And this is where the problem comes in for me. Because the moment that we try to disarm people, then that tells me we're not thinking about this the right way. Now, I am concerned with the leaders and the people that are pushing this agenda. Obviously, those are the worst kind of people. I doubt that I'm ever going to be able to convince any of them, because they have a very self-interest. They have a self-interest that there's nothing really that I can do to change their mind. But to those that don't know any better and are just hearing this information and acting upon it and mimicking and parroting what is being said, I think we can try to have that conversation with those kinds of people. I'll give you an example of this. Right now, there's a big movement with pro-Palestinian, which is like de facto pro-Hamas, okay? And if you don't think that's true, then you really have to do a little bit more homework on what it actually means to be pro-Palestinian and to do the things that pro-Palestinian organizations, for example, are saying that should be done. One of them is that, the Palestinian people should have their land back from the river to the sea. When you say those terms, a lot of people don't even know what that actually means. They hardly know the river. They hardly know the sea that they're talking about. And they don't think about the implication of what that means, okay? About the loss of life that would have to occur in order for that to happen. So we have to be able to think about these things in such a way where we're not like going to the extremes of any side here, okay? So for the framers, none of this mattered as far as the kind of weapon or anything like that. Or at least it wasn't what was driving the conversation. What was driving the conversation was people need to protect themselves. People need to protect their right to live, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, those are the three things that we've talked about that are at the top, okay, of natural rights, let's say. So I want to read this to you because maybe this might help. It's helped me thinking about it this way. So let me read to you first the Second Amendment. Okay, again, it says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So there's four things here that are important. Okay, a well-regulated militia. Okay, we got to understand what that means. Being necessary to the security of a free state. So the security of a free state, we have to understand what that means. Then the right of the people to keep and bear arms, we have to understand what that means. And then shall not be infringed, which is like the basic part of the whole text here, right? Is you don't violate that right. Okay, so let me explain it to you in this way. I'm going to read this to you because then I can maybe go through this. In order for a free state to maintain its security, to remain free, okay, a well-regulated militia is required. So that's the first thing we know. Okay, in order for a free state to maintain its security, to remain free. That's the idea, right? You're free, you want to stay free. Well, in order to do that, they have to have a well-regulated militia. Now, a militia, okay, is not an army. This is very, very important because a lot of folks would think that the militia is only the National Guard, for example, right? National Guard is something that a governor can call into action in an emergency or natural disaster or anything like that. They call in the National Guard. You've seen this. That's part of what that means, but that's not all that it means, okay? And so we'll try to look at that aspect of it possibly next week. So, but the militia is not an army, okay? It consists of the people, okay? But a simple militia cannot do it. So a militia is really talking about the citizens, the people. But notice that it says a well-regulated militia. So a simple unregulated militia is not what you need. You need a well-regulated militia, and there's a difference. So how is this accomplished? How do you get a well-regulated militia? And the militia here being the people. Well, you never infringe the right of the people to keep and bear arms. So that's what this amendment is trying to say. Okay. It's trying to say you have a free state, right? Yes, we have a free state. Do you want to keep that free state secure? Yes, we do. Okay, that you need a militia. Do you know what a militia is? No, I don't know. It's the people being armed. Oh, okay. But that militia has to be well regulated. Oh, okay. How do we do that? How do we have a well regulated militia? Well, you can never, ever infringe on the right of the people to keep and to bear arms. All right. So the idea, I'll keep reading here, becomes simple, at least in my mind. Okay. And I'm trying to say this in a simple manner. If I'm not, just drop a comment and let me know. The idea then becomes simple. The regulated militia, okay, must consist of the people keeping and bearing arms. That is, here's the definition of that, to have the ability to have weapons and access to weapons and to carry the weapon in such a way that it becomes a deterrent of tyranny within the state. Hence, keeping the security of the free state to remain free. That makes sense? So you have to have access to weapons. You have to be able to keep them on your person, in your home, in your car, right? However you want to think about that. And then you have to be able to carry that weapon in such a way. Now, I remember the first time I took my wife shooting. I'm going to embarrass her here a little bit. And I'm not going to go through the whole story because I can talk a lot about that. But she was very, very, very nervous. You know, she needs more practice. She needs to learn how to handle the weapon better, and get over the shock and the fear of the noise and what that means when you're shooting. Okay, so I get it. I get that some people are just, you give them a gun and they go ham at it, right? They're just happy. They love it, and they're just gonna do what they do. But that's not the case with everyone. And so one of the ideas that comes out, and I wish I had time to go through all the different documents that exist that talk about this, but one of the ideas was that all men should have a weapon, and that all young children should be taught as they're coming of age to handle a weapon. The idea was that so that when you have the men in the society, all the men know how to handle a weapon. Because at any moment's notice, okay, at any moment, the state can turn against you. The tyranny of the state can happen just like that. Now, one of the things, this is really interesting, that was happening, okay, before we became the United States, is that Great Britain had allowed the colonists to have weapons because they were in war with France. And so they needed our help, okay, the colonists' help. And they allowed them to have weapons. And as soon as, they saw victory there, they were like, well, now you got to give us the weapons back. And people were like, kind of like Texas, right? Come and take it kind of idea. If you know your Texas history, you know what that means. And so the idea, you see this even in correspondence at the time, Britain knew there's tens of thousands of men in the colonies that know how to handle a weapon. This is a problem for them because Great Britain wanted to just rule, right, as a monarchy. They didn't want representation. They didn't believe in all the natural rights in the same way, even though they had a Bill of Rights of their own. But they were infringing upon the rights. And so the way that this amendment is described is really a description of the time. But it's not like that threat is not there anymore. The threat is still there. And this is one of the most important things that we need to remember. We need to understand. If you're someone who does not like the Second Amendment because you don't like guns, then you've missed the point. You know, you can get over your fear of guns. You can get over your natural, let's say, dislike of it, maybe to some extent. It doesn't mean you'll love guns like some other people do, right? Like, I don't love guns. I'm not like this huge gun lover. I don't have like a chest of, like a hidden pathway in my house full of an armory. That's not me. I wasn't raised in that way. I wasn't. The guns in Chicago were always gangbangers that had it. They were shooting each other and cops were shooting them. And so it was never a good, image of guns anyways. But I understood why we have the Second Amendment. And so I do have a gun, even though I'm not a gun enthusiast, let's say. You don't have to be an enthusiast of guns to understand this amendment and to understand the reason behind it. And even the word here, when you read the amendment, it says, the right to bear arms, plural there, it's the variety of them. So the whole idea that we have where people want to, some people in the government want to restrict the kinds of weapons we have is to me, is very alarming because, we could keep dwindling that until you're allowed like a pencil, but only using the eraser end of it, like that's your weapon. You can imagine that? It's like they'll just keep saying, "Well, that's too dangerous. That's too dangerous. That's too dangerous. That's too dangerous." And then you just have a bunch of people like stabbing each other with, like hacking each other with axes or something. So we need to understand why, the arguments against the Second Amendment are often wrong. But there's a bigger argument that happens here. Okay. And it's that when it comes to the Second Amendment, we have roughly two sides of the argument. Okay. The first side of the argument says, well, the Second Amendment allows for a collective right to bear arms. Okay. A collective right to bear arms. Now, why is that the case? Well, they read the amendment like this. They say a well-regulated militia, you see, it's a militia that has to be well-regulated. And that means that only the state can regulate the militia. Like they start adding stuff to that. Being necessary to the security of a free state. They're like, see, it's talking about the state there. The right of the people to keep and bear arms. And then they say people must mean state there or militia or the people in the militia. And so they have a collective idea of, or a collective interpretation, I should say, of this amendment. That's one side. The other side says the Second Amendment allows for an individual right to bear arms. That's where I stand. Okay. So let's understand the differences between these two things. Well, the first thing is the idea, okay, of the collective versus the idea of individual freedom is rooted often in many issues in our society. Okay. You're going to see this constantly. And so it's important, if you don't understand the differences between the ideology of the collective, okay, or the community, if you want to think about it that way, versus individual freedom, you really need to try to brush up on these things, because the idea of collective always sounds good. It hardly ever sounds bad, okay? And, when you think about even Bible verses, right? It's, and they were together in harmony. It's like, oh, yes, that's how we all want to live. But hardly is it real in the world, okay? You never see it as real in the world. So in nearly every case that I can think of, the idea of the collective is often wrong, and it leads to destruction because it becomes ideological, okay? It becomes a problem because while our founders themselves, they believed in the equality of men, it seems to me that they were really talking about how man is created before God. Where today, when we talk about equality, we're talking about, finding some sort of tolerance with how people are different than you. I know that sounds kind of weird, but if you look at from BLM all the way down to pro-Palestinian movements and all of this stuff, equality is kind of like their main key word, right? For everything. Equality, 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 equality. And everybody has to be treated the same. But what does that mean exactly? Because we have people, for example, that are pro-abortion, and you have others who are anti-abortion or pro-life, which is the political way, I guess, of putting it. Which I understand why I would want to, keep life. I know that I have a biblical worldview of the world. I'm anti-abortion. I'm pro-life. How am I going to fit into the collective if a larger part of that collective says, well, you're wrong? What's supposed to happen at that point? Am I supposed to become tolerant of you, but you cannot be tolerant of my position? And how is that equal? And the problem is, that's an obvious example, right? The problem is that happens within the people that agree on things, okay? And so even within the collective that agrees, they'll start infighting. They'll start arguing one with the other. And it becomes dangerous, okay? Because natural rights, these are the rights that we have as humans, can never be infringed. In fact, when we read the language in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the word shall not is what's used on there, okay? For example, we look at the Second Amendment again. It says shall not be infringed. It's like a law, right? A universal law that nobody shall break. And if someone shall break it, there shall be a punishment to that. Okay? And so this is a very clear idea in the Constitution. I really don't know how better I can emphasize that. It's a extremely clear thing that these are natural laws that we have that no one can take away from you. Okay? And you have to do the best that you can to form the kind of government that's going to protect these rights. Okay? And if you don't get that and you want a biblical idea of that, go to Romans 13 and read that like 10 times. And read it again if you don't get, and keep reading it until it sinks in what the role of government is to terrorize those that are evil and bad. It is to be a bulwark against that, to stand against tyranny, which is why government should never become tyrannical. And then the idea that the founders had, and this was common among men at the time. This was a central idea. This wasn't like a left idea or a right idea, okay, or conservative or anything like that. The idea was simple. If we're going to make sure that the government doesn't get tyrannical, then the people have to be armed. That threat has to exist. I was telling my wife earlier today, I said, if the federal government, for whatever reason, decides we're going to go into Texas and we're going to activate martial law in all of Texas and we're going to limit people's rights and we're going to throw our opposition in jail, okay? Well, if they decide to do that, at the moment that they're starting to come into Texas, they're going to have to stop and think, I wonder how many people are gun owners. Because there's going to be a resistance there. And it is that resistance that often will stop a tyrannical government, okay, from moving forward. Why? Because we will defend ourselves, okay? Now, I don't know if that's true for California, right? Or New York or these places that are super woke. If people there have given up, you got all these gun buyback programs and stuff like this that happens in these cities. How would you defend it? Stop, please. Is that what you're gonna say? Like, how is that gonna happen? Are you gonna like shoo them away? Like, please leave. Please don't terrorize us. Is that what's gonna happen? I mean, isn't it weird that we have right now? I'm going on a tangent here. Forgive me, but isn't it weird that we have right now millions and millions of illegal immigrants that are coming to this country, and story after story keeps coming out of these people either getting a weapon of some sort or just being violent and killing and raping women and stealing and doing all kinds of things. And it is often happening in places where people have already decided, I'm not going to have a gun because, I'm a peaceful, loving person. And, we're not, it's illegal, or I got to jump through so many hoops to get a gun in this city. And it's so complicated. It's so complicated, and you have to figure to yourself, well, if you're the criminal, you're the bad guy, where would you go? Are you going to go to like a heavy fortified city in Texas that everybody's got a gun? Or are you going to go to these soft places? Or are you going to go to these soft places? And so just think about that for a minute. You don't have to be, again, a gun enthusiast. You don't have to be this whatever caricature that you think a gun owner is, that the news tries to portray. It's like every time there's a shooting, they want to make that shooter be the poster boy or poster girl or whatever for what a gun owner is. And that's so untrue. That person represents tyranny. And the only thing that's ever stops those people is another gun. So I don't get the point. Often it's like, what's the argument? So we have the shooter, right? The Trump shooter. He's just shooting people. Imagine no guns. Imagine no counter snipers. Just, like shields, maybe, and the stick, the pencil, the eraser. Like, we gonna do? Poke them to death. What are you gonna do? Please stop shooting. As he opens, just shoots everybody out there until he runs out of ammunition. What are we talking about? And so we don't celebrate the death of anyone. And it's tragic. And I talked last week, we're talking about someone that possibly, as far as I can tell, went to hell. We're not going to sit here and celebrate that. God doesn't sit up there and celebrate that. And so we got to keep things in perspective. But this whole idea of being against the Second Amendment, to me, is just a huge lack of understanding of what the Second Amendment really is. Okay. So each individual has an exclusive right to their human rights, to be free, to have life, to have liberty, to be able to pursue happiness. Okay. And all these ideas are ideas that live in the realm of individual rights. It doesn't live in the realm of the collective. In the collective, what you don't have ever is 100% agreement. You can never get to a point where everybody's on the same page. And so the best that you can do is create a government, which I think we have if we follow the Constitution, that takes as much consideration of the people as you possibly can. And you leave as many of the rights in the hands of the people as you possibly can. And the people give up some of the rights, okay? They give up some of those rights so that we can be cohesive as one union, as a country, let's say, okay? This is really important. This is part of the Constitution. Now, invariably, in a collective mindset, you have to leave someone out. And usually that person is whoever disagrees with you, okay? Where in an individual freedom mindset, if I don't agree with you, we just agree to disagree. And as long as you're not harming my natural rights and I'm not harming yours, we can live peaceably. We don't have to like each other at all. Like the Second Amendment shouldn't be this divisive thing when you think about it. Like it often seems to be the case that those that are anti the Second Amendment in one way, shape, or form often are pro some of the other things that we would also disagree with. And it's almost like you have to just pick that one up. And if for just today, we can be reasonable about this, we could say, wait a minute, what's the point of me being against that? It's clearly the one thing that stops tyranny. The right to bear arms is the thing that helps people countless, and we have countless situations situations where it happens that whether it's a homeowner or a store owner defends his property, defends his own life, okay, against an intruder. This happens all the time. And something that I was talking with my friends the other day was, you have this idea where people say, I don't like guns, I don't like to shoot people, but then you'll talk to them and like, well, what do you do if like someone's trying to break into your house? Like, I got a bat. So you'd rather like bludgeon the person to death than like shoot them. Like, I just don't get the mindset behind that. And I think that when we look at the Second Amendment, we have to try to be a little bit more reasonable. Okay. And we should do this on both sides anyways. Is that all the time I have left? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the collective and gun laws, okay? And try to just unpack this a little bit more. The problem of the collective is seen in gun control laws, okay? You have people that are peace-loving individuals, okay, that believe, and they're docile, right? They're the more docile in nature. At least we're going to give them that because, often they're not so docile. And they say something like this: less guns is better than more guns, right? Less guns is better than more guns. And you hear this criticism. You hear this criticism from, other people in other countries that, they have gun laws and they look at America. They're like, oh, like people just shoot themselves a lot over there. Meanwhile, they have very little freedom to do anything. And so you can criticize it, right? But if you criticize it and you haven't thought about it, you're probably wrong. Because these ideas are very well thought out, as far as I can tell. Now, if the collective enforces the law, for example, that less guns is better than more guns, those who disagree, right, but are compliant are left at the mercy of those who disagree and are not compliant. Now think about that, right? So we passed a law that says, hey, we got to confiscate the guns, all weapons, your nunchucks. We're going to confiscate the whole thing. All right. And, you got people be like, oh, okay, sure. And they just come and they just, they give away their weapon and they're like, wow, we live in a much safer society now, because nobody has guns or weapons or arms. And yet then you're going to have those who are just going to be like, no. And so what happens? Well, then you have a society, right, where those that are compliant are now at the mercy of those that weren't compliant. And what if those that aren't compliant are criminals? Isn't this what happens in cities with gun laws? Right? Like in cities with gun laws, a shooting starts to happen. Everybody's running away. Nobody's sitting there shooting back because nobody has a gun to shoot back with. But if now everyone had a gun and everybody was carrying, you're going to think twice about pulling that trigger in public. Because I'm probably going to die. And that doesn't mean that's going to stop that person necessarily, but I guarantee you more often than not, it will deter them from doing that. At least that's how I feel about it. And and I don't have the statistics, but I would imagine that the statistics would be on my side on that as well. If someone does have stats on that, please share it with us. Okay, so what's the bigger problem of the collective, though? Well, the bigger problem of the collective is that it points outward all the time. It tells someone else what they should do. And it takes for granted its own position, okay? The collective has the kind of people in it that when they create these kinds of laws, let's say, or desire to create these kinds of laws, they think to themselves, they think to themselves, well, we're nice people. We're going to obey this law, certainly. You know, we're non-violent, you know, we're not going to do that. You know, we're going to be good. But they take for granted that there's people within the collective that are not as docile as they are not as peace-loving as they are. And this is the trick, isn't it? History shows us this. And it shows us that that's not the case. The collective, okay, that comes up with the most restrictive laws often break their own very laws that they set. I mean, look at the pandemic, for example. You can't go to the barber. What were politicians doing? Getting their haircut. You can't go to the restaurant. What were politicians doing? They were eating at the restaurant. You can't do this. You can't have parties. What were they doing? They were having parties. Like, wait a minute. But the peons out there, little guys out there, they're like, oh, that's good though. We're protecting the people and that's okay. And I remember during the pandemic, I went out almost every day, which is not something I normally do. You know, I'm usually working. I'm busy. I like watching TV or whatever, you know, reading my books. And I'll tell you what, during the pandemic, we were out there, me and my wife, every single day. We made sure the world saw us, you know, because you're just not going to tell us to stay locked in and not go anywhere. It doesn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense at all. So, okay, I'm gonna try to wrap up some of this stuff here because we have a lot that we want to say on this. So another problem with the collective is that it usually doesn't self-govern. It doesn't self-regulate properly. Now, why am I talking about all this? Well, I'm talking about this because the idea that is preached, let's say, okay, for lack of a better word here, that is propagated or promoted, let's say, is that we want to have a safer community. Just go to just type in the name of the city wherever you're in on Google, and just type, you know, if you live in Dallas like I do, type Dallas and put in, you know, gun control buyback program, something like that. And I guarantee you almost every city is going to have some sort of buyback program where they say something like, you know, if you have unwanted guns in your house, or old guns, or any weapons that you want to give, bring them down and we'll give you $100 gift card for it. Okay, something like that. And they'll say keeping the community safe. Okay. No, you're keeping the community disarmed is what you're doing. And if you have, if you know anything about the Second Amendment, you should never, ever, ever take your gun to one of those kind of places. Okay? Ever. You know, because it doesn't make any sense to do that at all. Particularly if you have a working gun. Maybe if your gun is trash, okay, you know, go get $100 for it maybe. But that's a different story. But that's not really what they're trying to do, by the way. Okay? They're not trying to just recycle your guns to be nice and help you out. They're trying to disarm you. And you have to be aware of this. Okay? Okay, so when the founders and framers thought of a federal government, okay, because I feel like I might get some pushback on this, on the whole idea of the collective, because when you have the founding fathers, they're saying, hey, we need to unite. And there is a sense of a collective ideal there. At least I think. Maybe I'm wrong. You guys can correct me on that. But I think they meant to create a collective kind of will, though. Not so much a collective people. James Madison, if you read some of his work, he talks about, creating a will that is stronger than the people, because the people, we tend to be, lean towards being tyrannical. We lean towards evil. And if you read the Bible, God says this about men, right? Their heart is continually inclining towards evil. And this is part of the sin nature. We know this from a biblical perspective. Okay. They had the same conception, no different than that. They understood this. They understood, and if it wasn't a biblical worldview, it was certainly a obvious worldview from just, observing the world, that men tend to kind of always go towards tyranny, fighting, and that kind of thing. And so the idea was to form a government. Okay, the idea comes from the monarchy. You have the monarch who has absolute authority and will, and whatever he says goes, whether you like it or not. And he says we need to create something like that, but we need to divide it up into 3 branches of government. One of those branches is divided into 2. We know the legislative branch has the House and the Senate. Okay, and so in this way, he breaks up that will so that there's a check of powers here. Okay, but it's designed, all of that is designed to keep away the tyranny of the majority, okay, which was a problem that was happening at the time, and to build the kind of government that's going to protect the natural rights. And James Madison believed this so much that he didn't even think we needed a Bill of Rights. He was like, no, because the Constitution says exactly what the government is supposed to do and nothing else. Every other right we keep. Okay. But there was arguments about that, and that's how we ended up with the amendments. Everybody understood that there would be amendments to this. The Bill of Rights were the first 10, and so that's why they're called the Bill of Rights. But they're just amendments, okay? I think there's 26. Oh man, can you look that up? Is there 26 total? 28? I can't remember now. I'm probably wrong on that. And now I feel like I shouldn't have brought that up. But anyways, my wife will tell me here how many there were. Okay, somebody put rebels. I don't know why they put that. That's funny. Okay. So now let me not get too much into that, because I wanna get to a different point here. So any form, okay, of a collective militia. Again, this goes back to people that are thinking about the collective and saying, well, the only people that can have arms are those that are part of the militia. In this case, in the distinct National Guard, right? There's 27 amendments. Okay, I was only off by 1. I said 26, 27. Okay. So this idea, okay, of a collective militia, meaning, they're regulated by the state, automatically takes away the natural right for the individual to bear arms. Okay. Because at the time, if we say, let's say we pass a law in Texas that says only members of the Texas National Guard, let's say, can have guns, then we either all got to go be members of the National Guard, okay, which it might be a possibility, but if they have a certain let's say a physical test or an age restriction or something like that, it's going to restrict people, right? Or maybe it's going to restrict based on gender or something like that. Whatever it might be, there might be restrictions. Automatically, you infringe the right of the individual to the individual's right to bear arms. That's a problem, okay? And that's, on that reason alone, you should reject any idea of a collective militia in that sense, okay? So I want to point you towards a resource here, because we do have to consider a little bit of historical context for this in order to try to understand this in the best way possible. And I want to tell you about this resource because it's helping me a lot understand these things. It's called, I don't have the book in front of me because I only have an ebook version of it right now. I'm probably going to order myself this book here soon because I like to read physically on books, but it's called The Founders' Second Amendment, Origins of the Right to Bear Arms. Okay. And the author is Stephen Halbrook. Okay. Great resource. I would suggest you pick that up, among other things, but that one in particularly stood out to me, and it's been very helpful. Let's go back real quick. We got about 10 minutes here if you want to hang with me for 10 minutes, okay? When British soldiers were coming to occupy America, okay, they had sent these soldiers in ships over to America to occupy the land, and eventually disarm the people. There was a newspaper called the Boston Gazette, okay, and an anonymous, if you want to call it article, an anonymous warning was placed on this newspaper. And it warned against three things. Okay, here they are. The first was the colonists were to be disarmed. This is why the soldiers were coming. They were coming to disarm. The second was martial law would take effect. Okay, martial law is any time that the military takes over the civil law of the land. Okay, and basically they run the show. Okay, and the third thing was that leaders of the opposition would be arrested. Now, again, the colonists were to be disarmed. Martial law would take effect, and the leaders of the opposition would be arrested. That's like exactly what's happening right now. To a different degree, yes, I get it. We're not colonists, okay? We don't have an invading army coming in. Well, at least not an army in the traditional sense. We do have a problem at the border that seems like a de facto invasion of sorts. And then you have martial law, and so let me give you some examples here. The disarming we've already talked about to some extent with the gun control laws. Okay, so they're trying to disarm us. Okay, that's one. Then you have the martial law. Okay, martial law. Think about January 6th, right? The so-called insurrection. Okay, we're just going to call it the Capitol protest that did erupt, by the way, into vandalism and forced entry into the Capitol building. But there seems to be indications that there was some bad players on both sides of that event, and I don't know that we'll ever get to the bottom of it. But I do know what happened after the fact. After the fact, there were, in one report that I read, over 40,000 police officers from varying federal and state agencies, local agencies as well, that converged on Washington D.C. because Joe Biden obviously was going to be at the inauguration, and so they had 40,000, and basically what looked like military trucks out there. It was almost became the idea of what martial law would start looking like. This mass movement of officers, armed guards, right, that populate an area and control that area and control your movement and tell you when you can leave your house and when you cannot, and how late, they have curfews and this kind of thing. This has happened. We've seen this already mobilized. We've seen a sort of martial law, or at least mandates that want to control people. And usually wherever there's a mandate, there's also going to be some kind of force that's going to be present in order to enforce that law or that mandate. Okay. And so we've seen this happen. If you think about the pandemic and everything that happened there, how about, leaders of the opposition being arrested? If you followed anything that's happened with Donald Trump, for example, and anybody that in any remote way was involved in anything that man ever did, if they had breakfast with the guy, they're being questioned, they're being hounded, they're being thrown into jail, or they're being thrown into a court proceeding. They're taking all their money with court fees and all. It's ridiculous. So if you don't think that political prosecution is happening in this country, you're living under a rock. And I don't know if we can help you. I hope we can, but I don't know if we can. So you have then this right to bear arms, okay? that's being taken away. And this is what's happening in Britain or in America at the time. Now, this is what the founders, okay, and the colonists at the time were essentially fighting against, okay? Here's something that Samuel Adams wrote. I found this interesting. He said, quote, "Everyone knows that the exercise of the military power is forever dangerous to civil rights, right? But there are some persons who would, if possibly they could, persuade the people never to make use of their constitutional rights or terrify them from doing it." He's talking here about the right to bear arms. He's saying, look, they want to put a military here in the midst of us, and they want to disarm us. And if they can terrify you into doing it, or if they could persuade you, either one. Now, one of the saddest things that we're seeing in America is that half this country often seems like they've been persuaded that all we should do is, go the way of perdition, it seems like. And some of us are standing here looking at this saying, are these people blind? What's wrong? How do you not see this? Well, they've been persuaded. And so in my, opinion, I feel like, well, if they were persuaded to believe that, maybe we can persuade them to unbelieve it. Okay. And so this is why free speech is such an important thing, right? We talked about that in the last couple of weeks, because it allows you to have these kinds of conversations. Okay. And so you have this huge problem going on with the colonists and the British government, and basically all these rights are being infringed upon. Okay, and the argument of the right to bear arms, I cannot tell you how huge that was at the time. It was one of the biggest motivators that led to the War of Independence. And when you look at Texas history, it's the same thing. Mexico wanted to take the cannon, the only one cannon. All the Texans had one cannon. And they're like, we got to give it back. And they're like, come and take it. We're going to fight. We're going to fight until we die if we have to protect the right to bear arms. And so not only did that happen in Texas, that happened in the United States as a whole. Okay. Or in the colonies, okay? They weren't the United States yet. And so I'm going to have to start wrapping it up here, but what ended up happening on March 5th, 1770 is called the Boston Massacre. And I'll just finish with this because it's so interesting when you study the Boston Massacre. Here you have soldiers that were British, and you have these group of men that is angry at them, and they're fed up with this constant presence of the military, all hounding them all the time. And they come out and they have their weapons, they have it's called, I think, cutlass. It's like a particular kind of sword. And they're like, come on, we dare you to shoot, we have a right. And so they're having this argument, and both sides are feeling like, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen here. And at some point, a shot gets fired, and I think it's 4 people get killed. Okay. Now, as interesting as that is, and we can talk about that a lot, what I want to mention here real quick before I end is the trial that happened after that. Okay. You had John Adams and others who were part of this trial, and they were patriots. They were the colonists. And they sat there, and some of them were prosecutors, and others were defending. And the big thing that comes out of this is this: the soldiers were ultimately acquitted of homicide, because the people that lived in America at the time said, the lawyers were arguing, they have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to bear arms, but we have a right to bear arms as well. But because we were kind of coming at them and they were trying to defend themselves, we're going to acquit them. And that to me is like mind blowing. And I don't have to get into it here, but it's mind blowing because it sets up the kind of government that would eventually form and get us to something like the Second Amendment. A deep-seated belief that every man, when he's confronted with an attack against his life, liberty, and his pursuit of happiness, has every right to keep and to bear arms and to utilize those arms in order to protect those natural rights. And that is essentially what the Second Amendment is. And we'll try to, tease that out next week. We'll at least do one more week on this particular amendment, because I think it's worthy of our time. But I've run out of time. So thank you so much. Again, last opportunity before midnight tonight. If you want to get this book, make sure you subscribe. Okay. mindofmiz.com/giveaway. So you can get a chance to win this book. Other than that, we really do appreciate everyone. Thank you for all our subscribers. Thank you for those that have been listening live. We will see you guys next week. This has been the Mind of Miz podcast.